Hello, this presentation is going to focus on population structure, and the particular type we're going to be focusing on is internal sociocultural stratification. In our previous presentation, we examined marriage and family as a form of population structure of the sociocultural differentiation type, meaning there's no categorization or there's no hierarchy in terms of the categories within this type of structure. The others we're going to look at in terms of internal stratification are ethnicity, social class, and occupations. When we examine ethnicity, it's important to differentiate that from the concept of race, which has to do with physical appearances. There is no biological basis to race. That's a common misunderstanding, but in terms of genetic differentiation, there are not distinct groups of humans. So that's not something we're focusing on here. We're looking at culture. Ethnicity has to do with cultural differences, language differences, religion, and so forth, and very specific to context and country. So for instance, India has an ancient caste system that's derived from the Hindu religious belief system. Also, African nations, there we have tribal identity reigning supreme, as there's a great variety of ethnic tribal groups there across the African continent. In the United States, ethnicity and race have been blended together and often confused, and the census has struggled to come up with meaningful definitions and has continually shifted how it measures ethnicity and race. Before 1850, both black slaves and so-called Indians were counted in the census. After 1850, the term mulatto was introduced. That's subsequently been dropped. Since 2000, one can claim more than one race, but again, under race, we have such categories as American Indian and Latino, or Spanish-speaking, depending on what decade we're talking about. And those, of course, have to do with ethnicity, not race. So when we talk about ethnic inequality, we're not talking about anything that's inherent. This is completely determined culturally. The United States, as many nations in the world, has a form of ethnic inequality, and it's revealed in the structural outcomes of different ethnic groups. For example, the median income for European Americans is $54,000 at the household level, which is far more than that for Hispanics at 37, Native Americans at 35, but less than Asian Americans at 67. So there's something going on in terms of ethnicity that is having consequences for household income. The U.S. is a changing country with the ethnic composition shifting, especially over the last 10 or 20 years, as we see here. African Americans in 2000 made up 11.8% of the population. 2010, that has not shifted, but you can see that the percentage of Asians has grown from 3.5 to 4.4. Hispanic population has grown 3%, while the European population has declined about 4%. Now, a lot of that has to do with the internal age structures of these groups. The average Hispanic American is much younger, whereas the average European American is much older. If we examine the inequality in the occupations of the United States, we could turn to the Bureau of Labor Statistics to obtain the required data, and there you'll find quite a variety of occupations as shown in the top level categories on this slide. But on this table, we can actually compare those across earnings, and that's where we get our stratification, because, of course, not all occupations have the same earning. But if we look at the average hourly earnings, we can see, if we look across 2010, for instance, there's quite a range in terms of how much people make per hour. One of the lowest is down here in the accommodation and food services, with an average of $10.68 an hour. On the higher end of things, we come up here to utilities, $30 an hour roughly. If we look at proportional increases over time, that is where we've seen the greatest growth in earnings. Between 2000 and 2010, we come down to management of companies and enterprises as one of the largest growth areas, professional and technical services, which are all a subset of professional and business services, which as a category have seen the most growth in earnings, followed closely by education and health services. Of course, when we're looking at things like occupation and income, what we're really tapping into is a broader concept of social class. And sociologists tend to break social class down into two basic factors: wealth and income, that which is owned, that which is earned. And for the wealthiest individuals, most of their income is from their wealth. And for the poorest individuals, almost none of their income is from their wealth, and usually there is very little wealth owned at the bottom of the hierarchy. And if we think of wealth and income internally within the United States, we can see a great deal of stratification, but we can also see it when we compare nations cross-nationally in terms of external stratification, and that's what our next presentation will tackle.